All right. Well, my name is Oscar Fortis. I'm with Dr. Earth. We've been doing organics since for close to 30 years now. A little bit about myself. I've been in the lawn and garden industry for close to 25 years. I started working for a manufacturer's rep, which we represented different garden products, different garden companies, I should say. And then from there, I worked for one of the largest distributors in the garden industry. And we used to carry everything that you would find pretty much in a garden center. I mean, we would carry, we were distributors of Scott's Miracle Grow, other brands. Dr. Earth was one of the brands that we used to carry as well. Pots, you name it. We used to do it with Commerce. I've been with Dr. Earth now for about 4 years. I'm very familiar with Dr. Earth. I used to sell Dr. Earth prior to working for Dr. Earth, but so and I'm also an avid gardener, so I do a lot of gardening myself. Ever since I've been in this industry, I've been pretty blessed to be able to try different products. I mean, tons of different products, and get product knowledge from the companies themselves. So I just like to share some of the stuff that I've learned along the years, and the opportunity that I've had to try different brands. I know a lot of people who garden. It starts to get a little pricey when you start buying things to garden. I understand that. And so a lot of people don't have the fortunate ability to try a lot of different brands. So I've been pretty blessed to be able to try a lot of different brands. But what I wanted to talk to you today was a little bit about just basic organic gardening and where Dr. Earth kind of stands with organic gardening. Feel free to ask any questions on the chat, and I'll try to answer them. But a little bit about Dr. Earth. Dr. Earth was started in Santa Monica by Milo Shamus, who's the formulator and founder of the company. He started it in his parents' backyard, and the company. What Milo likes to do is he likes to take. He likes to be an innovator, and what I mean by that is. He was doing organic products, and that's all we've been doing for close to 30 years is nothing but organics. One of the things that he was challenged to do was to try to make organics much more of a trend, because 30 years ago, organic gardening, it was around, but the problem is that, and still to this day, synthetic fertilizers still dominate in our industry. And when I talk about synthetic fertilizers, I'm talking about, I'll just name, like Miracle Grow. Everybody understands what Miracle Grow, and they've been around. It's a synthetic fertilizer. And so that was the competition back then. And so one of the things that he did to kind of innovate the whole organic movement was he started introducing microbes and microrhizae to organic fertilizers. And here's the big difference between organics and synthetics is that with organics, you're feeding the soil. With synthetics, you're feeding the plant. And I don't know if this makes sense to a lot of you, but we're adding organic matter into the soil that breaks down, and then from there, the plant will be taking and uptaking that organic matter, the nutrients, and then using it. And in order for it to happen and happen quickly, you need, with any organics, you need breakdown. Breakdown is one of the biggest things when it comes to organic gardening. It's like in nature, things need to be broken down and then basically converted into the food. The way the owner of Dr. Earth really kind of revolutionized the organic fertilizer industry is that there was organic fertilizer around. I used to rep one called Whitney Farms and another one called E.D. Stone. And prior to Dr. Earth, there was organic matter in there, like, some of our pre-mixed fertilizers had bone meal, blood meal, fish bone meal, these different meals in there. And what has to happen is that those need to break down and get converted into food. So that would take a long time. Traditionally, it would take a long time. And that's why synthetics really kind of blew up, is because synthetics were fast and were quick. And so that's why they still, to this day, they've been used so much and they still dominate, is just because of the way they broke down. They didn't have to break down. They were already soluble and ready to go. So the way the owner of Dr. Earth kind of changed that was to introduce microbes and mycorrhizae into organic fertilizers. Microbes, think of microbes like Pac-Man, and what they do is that they actually break down the organic matter that our fertilizers are made out of, or the organic matter that's in soil, and then they convert it into food and make it available for the plants. So when you see our fertilizer, you're going to see on our dry fertilizers and soil, you're going to see this true biotics. And what the true biotics is microbes, which are listed on the back of the package. They're microbes and mycorrhizas. So what the microbes do is that they'll eat the organic matter that this is made out of. So, you know, we use different type of meals in our fertilizer, and what meals are, they're amendments. It's organic. They come. So good example. What really differs us from a lot of organic companies is the fact that we're very generous in putting in a lot of the microbes that help the breakdown. So what that did to the whole organic movement, it sped the process up and made organics more of a thing to go to because people started seeing results a lot faster. What I hear a lot is I have somebody come in and ask me, you know what, I have soil and it's very dead, it's clay, there's nothing there, it's dry. Well, when you would, back in the day before Dr. Earth, when you would add any kind of organic matter in there, whether it's blood meal, bone meal, if you're already adding that to soil that's dead, there's nothing there that's breaking it down. So it's going to take a long time for that organic matter to break down and turn into food. That's one of the things you always got to remember and realize, that with organics, it's all about breaking down. There are very, very few products out there that are water soluble organic, like a Miracle-Gro. So anything that you're buying, whether it be organic liquid fertilizer or dry fertilizer, it needs to break down and get converted into food for the plant to uptake. One of the benefits for that, people say, well, then I'll just keep using a synthetic because it works right away. The big difference with that is that with synthetics over time, since a lot of synthetic fertilizer is petroleum based, what starts to happen is it has a higher salt index. And so what happens is, with long periods of use of synthetics, you start getting more salt built up in the soil. Too much salt in your soil stops plants, grass from uptaking nutrients properly. So there's an advantage because it works quick, but then long terms, it doesn't really do anything to the soil. The way the synthetic works, it feeds the plant and it does nothing to the soil. So a lot of times when you see a synthetic fertilizer, you're looking at application rates, and application rates are usually add every 2 weeks. And the reason for that is because there's nothing in the soil. Once you water it with a synthetic fertilizer and it's water soluble, water travels and it travels down. So if you have a root base of your plant and you water the synthetic fertilizer, it's going to uptake, and it's great because it's soluble, it's instantly available. But what happens is that once it passes the root zone, water keeps traveling, and then guess what? You're left with no fertilizer, and then that means you have to apply that a little more frequently, just because it's not staying in the soil. It just keeps driving and grinding and it keeps going down. Water keeps traveling and traveling. So with organics, especially our dry organics here, they stay at the root base of the plant. And so when it's breaking down and it's turning into nutrients, the plant's able to feed off of it when the plant is hungry. So it's not held to a limited time. When you actually apply it, it's going to be there a lot longer. So typically on our dry fertilizers, you're applying it like once every 2 to 3 months, versus a synthetic fertilizer, which a lot of times, if you look at the application rate, you're applying it once a week. And because they feed the way they work is totally different. One word of advice is, if you're going to grow organic, stay organic, because what you're doing at the same time is also feeding the plants, you're conditioning your soil. So if you tend to mix both synthetics and organics, you're not it's not the end of the world, but you're it's kind of counterproductive of what you're doing. We're feeding the soil, and the soil is feeding the plant. One of the things that's very different about our brand versus a lot of other brands, and it's not exclusively to Dr. Earth, we're a very ocean-rich product. One of the main ingredients we use in a lot of our dry fertilizer is fish meal and fish bone meal. And people ask, well, why that, versus a lot of other companies will use chicken manure as the main ingredient in their fertilizer. not that there's anything wrong with chicken, but fish versus chicken poop, fish is just a better source of nitrogen, and it has a lot more trace minerals than, say, a chicken, and then also with chicken, you got to be careful of this, because with chicken manure, if it's not decomposed properly, there could be chances of burn on your plants because it's too hot. Typically, a lot of the brands that are out there that use chicken manure, you don't have to really worry about that too much, but there are some cases. Not only that, we stay away from manures in general, just because manures, unless you know what the animal's being fed, what's coming out at the other end makes a big difference. A good example, steer manure. It's been around for a long time. My grandfather used to use steer manure, but in today's age, what they feed steers and cows is a whole different ballgame of what they were being fed a long time ago. Now, if you're using steer manure that's being fed grass, what cows and steers should be eating, normal diet, more than likely that steer manure is a lot better than, say, a cow that is being fed an untraditional diet just to fatten up the cow. So my suggestion is, if you're buying steer manure or chicken manure, tend to stick with something that's organic, preferably that steer manure that is more to the natural diet, just because it makes a big difference. We use fish bone meal, and fish meal is just because when you think about all the streams around the world, a lot of things end up going to the ocean. So that being said, a lot of minerals are also coming along with that. So you have a lot more trace minerals that are found when you're using fish bone meal, fish meal. Also, we use a lot of kelp in our products as well. And they're just rich with a lot of trace nutrients. So besides the NPK, which you typically see on fertilizers, and I'll go over that in a little bit, the NPK on what you see on fertilizers kind of tells you what it's going to do and what's going to help you with. These numbers right here, if you're unfamiliar, and really the first two numbers, these are always in order. It's nitrogen, phosphorus, and so the first two numbers are really what generally a lot of people when they're gardening look to as what you want to do with it. So, like, good example, this is a 465, and I don't know if everybody can see this on here, but it's a 465 at the NPK. This is our all-purpose fertilizer of life. So the first number represents nitrogen. What that's going to do, it's going to help green and grow. That's basically a lot of the big functions. That first number is greening and growing. That's what dominates that first number. The second number is phosphorus, which is represents blooming and roots. Without, the more roots something has, the more blooms in general. There's always exception, but that's kind of the rule of thumb. So good example, if you are looking for a lawn fertilizer, you're going to look for something that has a high first number, because that's the main goal with a lawn. There's really no flowering in. We make a lawn fertilizer that's a 502. There's no phosphorus in it. You really don't need the phosphorus that much with lawns, because there's no flowering involved. Unless you have weeds, you're not really flowering a lawn. So we make a 502. The last number typically on a lot of fertilizers, just kind of overall health, stock, stem. It really doesn't drive a lot of the fertilizers. Like, good example, we make a fertilizer that's called our Bud and Bloom Booster. And this Bud and Bloom Booster, we recommend to apply in late summer and into fall, but it has a higher phosphorus number. And by that time, plants, that's what they're going to need the most towards the end in that season. So that's a little bit about the NPKs. The great thing is I just want you guys to keep in mind, if you're new to this and you're kind of follow along, on our website on drearth.com, if you go on there, we have our magazines that we have. There's a tab on there. If you click on, there's magazines. We have these gardening guides that are digital. We also have them in a printed version of them, but we have them all digital on there. You can download them. They're a PDF. And on there, you're going to see there's this great chart on here in there that breaks down the NPKs. So this way you could kind of go back and you're able to kind of follow up and remember what the NPKs are. But it kind of breaks them all down It breaks down all the 16 essential nutrients that a lot of the plants need to thrive. So you could always go on there and check out our magazine. There's a lot of good general information on there. We also have a really great organic field guide. And when you actually go to our main page of our website, this field guide right here, it's a pretty neat thing that we came out with last year. It breaks down everything that you would want to grow in your garden, and it breaks down not only, you know, all the health benefits that you get from what you're growing. It also has a lot of tips on disease prevention, the vitamins you get to it. It has a recipe, also a little bit of how to grow. So there's a lot of information that we do have on our website. So, you know, if you're not taking notes, or if you took some notes, or if I said something and I'm a little too quick, you could always reference some things back. We have a lot of great information on our website, and that's on drearth.com, DREARTH.com. There's no period in there. But going back to what's different, I know there's a lot of choices when you go into the store, and when you're in Anawalt. Anawalt does a great job of carrying a good selection of products. Like I said, what we've been doing is we've been innovating in the lawn and garden industry for about close to 30 years. And what makes us a little bit different as well is that, like I said, the owner of Dr. Earth is an innovator when it comes to organic gardening. You know, there's a lot of companies that get into it for maybe other reasons. I could tell you one thing, the reason why the owner of Dr. Earth got into it, because he had a passion for gardening. He wanted to bring premium good products to grow the best food and plants. That was his goal. And so, you know, he's always looking to make things a lot better. Everything that we do, by the way, is all 100% certified organic. We're members of the Farmers Bureau as well. Everything that we make is non-GMO. And pretty much everything that we make, for the exception of our liquid fertilizers, have our true biotics. And this is very important. Just you got to think of the soil being the stomach of the plant. Just like your stomach, right? I take probiotics every day. Probiotics go into your gut. They help you break down the food and help you get the nutrients correctly out of that food that you're eating. Well, that's what you're doing when you add our fertilizer. The true biotics that we put in there are breaking down this actual fertilizer and turning it into food, and breaking it down very quickly. Now, the mycorrhiza that we put in here, and it's all listed here on the back, the mycorrhiza that we put in here is another living organism. These things are alive. In our dry fertilizer, they're dormant. Once you mix this into your soil and water it in, they come out of dormancy. And so what they start to do is the microbes start to break down organic matter, and then the mycorrhiza that's in there starts to actually colonize. When you start to look at mycorrhiza under a microscope, it actually looks like roots themselves. They look like cobwebs inside the soil. And what they do is that they attach themselves to root bases of plants and trees. And what they start doing is they start spreading out and actually start uptaking the nutrients and water. So they actually help with drought, being, you know, for drought tolerant plants, and just helping uptake water and nutrients. So that's what you're getting when you put this down, is that you're adding life. Literally, you're adding life to your soil. We're very generous on the amounts of microbes and mycorrhiza that we use. That's another thing that separates us from a lot of companies, is that a lot of companies, once the owner discovered by doing this, a lot of companies started doing the same thing. But the big difference is that a lot of companies do it just to say they have it. And when you start taking a look at the amounts that they put in, it's very minimal. And, you know, with mycorrhizae and with microbes, you really can't have enough. Microbes, and I stress this a lot, microbes is what makes organics basically go around. Microbes break down organic matter and turn it into food. Don't get me wrong, there's other things that help break it down, but for the most part, microbes are really essential to break down organic matter. And so the more microbes you have, the merrier. We encourage to use teas as well. On the back of our bags, our 4-pounders, we have a fertilizer tea recipe. When you brew tea, so, you know, when you're brewing teas and you add that to your gardening, you're actually adding more microbes. The more microbes, the better, because the faster things break down. And then with the mycorrhiza, it helps to uptake the nutrients. We also have our liquid fertilizer, and I'd like to talk to you about just liquids in general when it comes to organics as well. Um, with our liquid fertilizers, I go back to the owner of Dr. Earth, always being innovative and trying to bring some of the most premium organics to market. With our liquid fertilizer, he teamed up with a couple of guys from the tech industry, from the Microsoft industry, I should say, and these guys were challenged to try to help to reduce all the food that was going into the landfill. And people might say, well, what's the big deal? Food's biodegradable. It's going to go back and decompose. That's true, but when it's in big abundance, you start to create greenhouse gases. So there's a lot of food that's being thrown out at the landfills, and they're being thrown out by supermarkets. So good example, you go into like a Whole Foods or a Sprouts or a Costco, whatever they don't sell, or say a steak that's organic or a fish that's organic that has a best sell by the date on there. After that date, the product's still good, but technically they have to throw it away. So they've been throwing it away. So Milo, the owner of Dr. Earth, teamed up with these guys that made these. They're called industrial food digesters, and so we have these in back of selected Whole Foods, Costco's, and Sprouts across the country. And what happens is that all the organic food, when it comes to fish, meat, produce like vegetables and fruits, instead of them going in the trash like they used to, we have these machines in the back of the store, and they put them in these machines, and we have enzymes in there, and they're enzymatically broken down. So we're literally using whole food to make our liquid fertilizer, which is really rare in our industry. In our industry, you got to understand when it comes to lawn and garden, and it comes to organic fertilizers, a lot of the companies and ourselves, like good example with our dry fertilizers, they're made of fish bone meal, fish meal, kelp meal. When you hear the word meal in a lot of ingredients, it's just pieces of that. So like good example, fish bone meal, it's a piece of the fish bone meal. It's not, it's not like we're using the whole fish. If we were to use whole fish to make fertilizers, and that not only goes for us, but other companies, it would be too expensive for people to buy. So like good example, when it comes to food, the food industry, restaurants and supermarkets get the cream of the crop. They pick the best stuff that's out there. Whatever they don't want, then the dog and food industry for dog food and cat food, they pick whatever the restaurants and supermarkets don't want. Then whatever they don't want, the garden industry gets. And that's merely for the fact that if we were to use and buy whole fish and whole pieces every day, a whole kelp, it would be too expensive for people to buy. And this is also a good way, and don't get me wrong, even though it's not whole pieces that we're using in our dry, it still works very, very well. But that's typically how our industry works. When you're looking at a fertilizer on the shelf, whether it's this or another brand and they have meals in it, it's not the cream of the crop. There are some things that we do to make sure that we get some of the best scraps. So like good example with the fish meal and the fish bone meal, we only use cold water fish, wild, not farm raised. So there's a big difference. People might ask, well, why is that important? A lot of times when it comes to fish products or ocean products, it's better from colder waters, less prone to disease versus warmer waters. And warmer waters, they find that fish have sometimes a little bit more disease than cold water fish. So that's a real big important thing to know, that when you're using fish products or ocean products that is from cold water, less prone to disease. But so that's one of the big difference, is that when you're looking at meals, they're pieces of something. Like kelp meal, we're not using the whole kelp plant. It would be very expensive for us to use the whole kelp plant. But going back to our liquid fertilizer is one of a kind right now in our industry, because there's companies that use food waste, and they're using the food waste when it's already soured. This is pretty new and remarkable, because we're actually using food before it sours. When you take a look at the ingredients on there, you're gonna see that it says digested food material, and we have to word it that way just because of just state laws. And not only that, but we can't actually list everything, because since things vary of of what supermarkets are throwing away, and the batches, like good example, say it's kiwi season and there's a lot of kiwi in the supermarket. That batch that we might be making, it has kiwi, but then there's some batches that don't. What we try to do is we try to keep the MPK a constant, but when it comes to some of the other elements in there, it's hard to control because of what's being thrown away. But it's pretty unique that we're actually using whole food. And people ask, like, what's the big difference between using whole food before it sours versus using food that's already been souring and then you're already using it to make stuff? There's companies who've been doing that, who've been using food scraps. And don't get me wrong, using food scraps when they're souring, it still works great. But if you could use food before it sours, you're using it when the nutrient density is very high. And what that means is that you're getting a more robust fertilizer that's more, the nutrient density is high, it's going to perform better. The test that we've done on our liquid fertilizer has been pretty remarkable compared to controlled or seaweed alone, just for the fact that we're using whole food. So this is, like I said, this is pretty one of a kind. It's the only fertilizer, liquid fertilizer on the market that is made with whole food. And it's also, you know, besides it being made with whole food, it's also a very green product because we're also helping to, you know, helping out with the landfills with all the food waste that's going on. Unfortunately, we're not taking all the food. There is still a lot of food that's being thrown out, but we're only taking the organic food because, like I said, this is all certified organic. It's all certified with the state. It's certified OMRI. We're non-GMO project verified. So we have to be selective. You know, we wish we could take all the food waste that's being thrown out, but, you know, in order to stay and be true organic, we can't do that. But going back to this, our liquids, unlike our dries, it doesn't have our true products in it. So good example, if you have really poor soil, my recommendation is to use our dries first, because our dries is going to introduce the microbes and the mycorrhizing that's lacking from bad soil. So if you have bad clay, dry soil, I always recommend our dries. Once you use this, you could actually use our liquids to water it in. This will keep feeding the microbes that you're putting in. And a lot of people, you know, are a little shocked when I tell them that if you're going to plant something, you could, in bad soil, use our dry and then use our liquid to water it in. And here's the reason why. With dry fertilizer, whether it's ours or any other companies that's an organic dry amendment fertilizer, when you first put it in there, it's not food yet. You're not going to burn anything. People are always asking me, how about if I over add something when I use your fertilizer, your dry fertilizer? It's okay. It's very forgiving. It takes a lot to really burn anything. And for the fact that we use no chicken manures or no cow manures, there isn't that chance of it running hot. So there's no chances of you burning anything. You really have to just overdo. I mean, it's going to be hard to overdo it to burn with our fertilizer. And I'm saying with ours, like I said, if you use another brand that might be chicken manure based, be careful, follow their instructions, follow how much they're telling you to put down. With ours, you could be a little bit more liberal and apply a little bit more than what the directions say. The directions that we have on there, it's good to follow, but even if you over add a little bit, you're going to be fine. Sometimes I'm a little heavier. I tend to add more than what our directions say. And the reason for that with our dry is that when you add a little bit more, you're not going to burn anything because, like I said, it's got to be converted into food. So our liquid, here's where it comes to our liquid. Our liquid will break down roughly in about 2 weeks, will fully break down. So a good example, this right here is going to take, and not only ours, but just in general, a lot of dry fertilizers really take about 25 days or so for it to fully break down and be food fully. It starts to break down and your plants will start getting benefits before that, but for it to be fully broken down, on an average, that's what it's going to take. There's ways you could speed up that breakdown by introducing more microbes. So like, you know, we have a fertilizer tea recipe on the back. When you make a fertilizer tea recipe, or if you know somebody that has a really good compost tea recipe, I encourage that, because when you brew tea, you're brewing more microbes. The more microbes, the happier your plants are going to be, because they're going to be breaking down this organic matter a lot more quicker. The more microbes you have, the more, like I said, you can't have enough microbes. The more microbes, it's going to break down organic matter. Not only what you're putting in with our fertilizer, but even organic matter that's in your soil, it starts to help break it down. So compost teas, there's a lot of good recipes. We have one that you could make with our fertilizers on top of adding the fertilizer. I recommend our liquids as well, because our liquids take about 2 weeks to fully break down. So if you plant something new into the ground and you follow the directions, you use our dry fertilizer, whichever it may be. We have a good abundance of different fertilizers. The NPKs are a little slightly different depending on what you're doing. This is one of our most popular. This is our homegrown. There's a lot of veggies, but you could actually apply this in the beginning to your brand new seedling and then water it in with this. And people ask me, well, is that kind of overkill? Like, why would you add this liquid fertilizer on this? Well, this is going to take a little bit of breakdown. What's going to happen first is that once you mix this into the soil, water it, the microbes are going to start coming out of dormancy. Right now, when they're in this, the microbes and mycorrhizae, they're dormant, and they're living organisms. And so you'll notice on our packaging that we do have a date. The date is actually because of the living organisms in here. The date has nothing to do really with the actual ingredients that it's made out of, like the fish bone meal, the fish meal, the kelp meal. That will stay good for pretty much ever, unless you leave it outside and it gets wet and it turns into as long as it stays in the bag, it stays well. But there's a date on our fertilizer because of the living organisms. The average is about 3 years that they stay in dormancy. Sometimes, depending on how you store it, they could stay a lot longer. But we get this question asked a lot, like, is your product good? I've had it sitting and I noticed a date on the back. Do I need to throw out the whole fertilizer? No, you don't. You're just not going to have probably the accurate micro count that's listed on the bag. But what happens is that's first what's going to take place when you put this in the ground with your seedling and you water it in. Once that water hits the fertilizer, those microbes and mycorrhizae come out of dormancy and start to go to work. With the liquid fertilizer, there is no there's no microbes in here. There's no mycorrhizae in here, and the reason for that is that because it's liquid, it's hard to keep anything that's living alive. You'll notice that with a lot of liquid organic fertilizers, it's very rare that you find a liquid organic fertilizers that has living organisms in it, just because of the fact that when it's first produced, it might have living organisms, but as it sits on the shelf with no oxygen, those microbes or mycorrhizae, they're going to die. So we don't bother to put it in our liquids. This liquid right here is really good to help feed microbes. Microbes will start forming by themselves naturally, but we like to help boost it by adding it into our dry fertilizer. So, one of the things that I like to promote, especially if you're growing fruits and vegetables, you want to maximize your harvest. You want something that's delicious, something that tastes great, something that feels and looks great, is to use our dry, water it in with our liquids, and that way you start creating a great soil base. Let me see here. We're pretty excited because at Anawalt, when the owner started the company, Anawalt was one of the first accounts that brought in Dr. Earth, and over the last 4 or 5 years, there were some changes with the company. We were growing. We had some people in place that I think weren't doing a proper job, and the relationship there with Anawalt kind of got a little bit. I should say, kind of went a little south a little bit, but we're excited to be back in Anawalt with a bigger presence. So, starting this spring, the buyer there at Anawalt is they're bringing in more of our products in there. They're bringing our fertilizers in there, and we're happy to be back with Anawalt a little bit more in a bigger presence. We do dry fertilizer. We do liquid fertilizer, and our liquid fertilizer, this right here is our pump and grow. Our pump and grow is really kind of designed for container gardeners. So if you have a patio or a backyard or with pots, this is called our pump and grow. You pump this directly into the soil. So the owner, besides innovating with technology, he figured, what's the thing that is kind of a pain in the butt when you're gardening and you have a lot of containers and you're using liquid fertilizers? Well, one of the things that I know, and he obviously hit it on the head, is that, when you're watering a lot of, say, a patio full of pots, and you're using a liquid fertilizer, a lot of times you have to sit there, get your measuring cup, measure it out, put it in a watering can, and repeat the process. Now, if you have a lot of containers, you repeat that process over and over again, filling up your watering can, diluting the liquid. Well, he came up with this, which is our pump and grow, which really the pump, it's basically measuring it out for you. So if you have, say, a 1 gallon container, it's a pump for every gallon of soil. So if you have a 1 gallon pot, you basically go to your pot, you do 1 pump, then you come back and water it in. So if you have a whole patio full of pots, you go and you pump it directly into the pot, depending on the size. So if it's a 5 gallon pot, it holds 5 gallons of soil, you do 5 gallon pumps, and then you come back and water it in. So now you don't have to sit there and measure and fill a watering can. It's a very simple process. That's what it's called, a pump and grow. You could also use it the traditional way. You could, mix it into a watering can and apply it that way. And then we also make it in a concentrate and in a hose application if you're doing bigger jobs and it's not in containers. So this one really, we designed this one really for a lot of container gardeners. We have this available in for succulents. We have it in our homegrown. We have an all-purpose. We have it in a smaller size. And this is all made with 100% organic whole food, and they're all 100% organic. But that's the big difference between the dry and liquid, is that dries typically take a little bit longer to break down than a liquid, but there's so much benefits in using both, and there's real big benefit in using a dry, and especially ours that have our true biotics in it. One of the things that you could do to help maintain a good micro activity in your soil is to not let your soil dry out. So if you have a raised bed, or if you have rose bushes, and instead of leaving the soil totally exposed, when that soil dries out too much, it's also drying out a lot of the microbes that are in there. So, mulching, or putting, like if you're doing a raised bed with veggies, I like to use straw and hay. That breaks down very easily, but it also keeps the soil covered, and it allows those microbes to stay in there and flourish and keep breaking down organic matter. Also with the hay, a lot of, it happens with me, a lot of worms start to come up and help to decompose some of that hay as well. So that's very important. Like I said, microbes is the key to organic gardening. The more microbes present in your soil, the faster organic matter is going to break down. Good example, going back to basics. If you ever seen the redwoods, you see these big, humongous redwood trees that've been growing there forever, and they're humongous, right? There is nobody out there with a bag of fertilizer fertilizing these trees. What's happening there is organic matter is falling from the trees, from the bushes. Animals are going there. They're doing their thing as well, And then what's happening is, that's all breaking down. It's basically composting itself. And then what happens after that is that, especially in the redwoods, there's a lot of mycorrhiza activity going on in the ground. And that's a natural, I guess it would be a self-defense that plants use to help utilize nutrients. So, we just try to mimic that and put it in a bag for you. Because what happens is that, traditionally in the suburbs, a lot of people landscape, and good example, I had a neighbor, has an orange tree in the backyard. You look over his backyard, it's a mess, doesn't cut anything. Oranges are falling down, but his orange tree is just flourishing, loaded. And you're thinking like, wow, why is that orange tree flourishing and there's nothing being done? Well, in nature, in true nature, plants feed themselves. So since he's not picking up anything, the oranges are falling. Bugs, even though, take it, I have an orange tree, you don't want to leave oranges on the ground, fruit flies and all that, but he never goes back there, so it doesn't make a difference. Nature is actually taking over, decomposing those oranges and putting nutrients back in the ground. What happens is that traditionally, when we landscape, we like things to look neat and organized. We take a lot of that stuff out. So we're here to help you put some of that stuff in without it being a big mess, and without having, you're not raking up your leaves and stuff like that. It's good to mulch with your leaves. So if you have a lot of leaves that fall, you have a tree that falls, mulch them. That's why I encourage a lot of grass clippings as well. If you could mulch your, grass as well, because you're actually adding more nutrients back into the soil, if that makes sense. So, this right here, organic fertilizing, organic dries, is a good way of, we're replenishing what Mother Nature would have been replenishing herself, if that makes sense. And at the same time, we're adding and making sure this is our insurance right here. The True Biotics that's in our fertilizer is our insurance. Whether you have really bad soil, that this stuff is going to break down, and it's going to break down a lot quicker than if it didn't have it. Good example, a lot of folks that been gardening for a long time, that either growing up with somebody that's used bone meal or blood meal. Those are all good organic meals to use. You'll find that we have in our fertilizers, we've kind of gone away from blood and bone meal, just because it's very hard to source good animal product that is, I guess, kosher and it's done properly. So we tend to stay away from that now. We do still sell blood meal and bone meal, but we sell it in a small scale. We don't put it, we used to use it in a lot of our mixes and our premixes. We really got away with that because trying to ethically find something that's really good and true in a big scale, it got harder as the company grew more and more. We kind of did away with some things. We used to use a lot of bat guano when the company first started. But then as we got bigger and bigger, it was hard to source good bat guano from friendly places that are doing it ethically. So we kind of got away from doing using some of these ingredients. It still doesn't change the fact that we're still using pretty premium ingredients in our products. But a good example, we still sell blood meal and bone meal. You'll find it, you'll see it on our website. We sell it in small packages. We don't do real big 50 pounders or anything like that. But we're one of the few companies that put our True Biotics with the bone meal and blood meal. A lot of people that I talk to say, well, I heard, to add bone meal in there, and I want to use bone meal. Well, that's very old school, and not saying that it works, but a lot of bone meal that you find from companies other than ours, when you're buying bone meal, that's all you're getting is the bone meal. So if you have a poor soil, if you have poor soil and you're looking to add a bone meal to your soil, it's going to take a lot longer for it to break down, because most of the bone meals that you find out there don't have our True Biotics in it. We're one of the few companies that on our single ingredients that we offer, like a bone meal, blood meal, kelp meal, we put our True Biotics in there. And it's because of the breakdown. We want it to break down quickly and turn into food. The faster this fertilizer turns into food, the faster it's going to start feeding your plants. So I can't stress that enough. We also make organic pesticides. You'll find this, and Anawalt's been carrying this. Again, going back to the owner of the company. The owner of the company doesn't like to be a Me Too company. There's a lot of companies that get into our industry and they say, wow, organics is it's the thing to be now. It's become more popular. So a lot of companies will just copy other companies, not really be innovative, just kind of have a Me Too product. That's what we like, we consider like a Me Too product. One of those is neem oil. And I don't know if all of you are familiar with neem oil. It's used as an insecticide, a miticide, and a fungicide. And neem oil has been around for a long time. It works if you use it, and you probably had some great results with it. But the owner, when he came out with our pest control and trying to stay organic, didn't want to have another neem product on there. Because if you go to the shelf at the garden store, you'll notice that a lot of the organic sprays, when you start taking a look at the actives, it's neem oil. And the way neem oil works with insects, disease, and fungus, what it does is the oil coats, it stops the bug from breeding, it suffocates it, and it dies. So it's a contact kill. So neem oil, when you use it as a pesticide, or if you use it on powdery mildew, what happens is that oil stops the mildew from spreading. And so that's what it's really doing. And so the owner didn't want to have just another neem oil on the product on the shelf along with everybody else's. So when he came up with our final stop insecticides, this is made out of essential oils. Now, essential oils that we use work like neem, but here's the big difference: is that when our essential oils dry, a lot of the essential oils that we use, like rosemary, thyme, peppermint, clove, these are plants that a lot of bugs typically don't like. So it also helps to be a deterrent and a preventive with some bugs. Neem oil, once you spray the neem oil, all it does, it suffocates and kills. So whatever bug's there, if you coat it, it'll suffocate and die. But if bugs come back around, it's not going to affect those bugs. It's not systemic. Even if they eat or chew on your leaf that you sprayed the neem oil, it's not going to kill them. That's just not the way these oils work. And so the benefit of using an essential oil versus a neem oil is the fact that it could also work as a preventive, instead of just only a contact kill. Not only that, but since this typically is the oils that we use compared to neem oil, a lot of neem oils on the market tend to be a lot thicker than this. And people say, well, hey, thicker is better. I don't have to apply it as much. Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's somewhat true, but what happens is that this is the way bugs work a lot of times. So say if you've had an infestation of mites on your plants, right? And you spray it with neem. Okay, all the bugs that came in contact more than likely are going to die, and you move on. But what happens is that if you don't get all the bugs, mites especially, it only takes a couple days and those things multiply very, very quickly. Since neem oil is a lot thicker, a lot of the products that are on the shelf versus ours, they'll say on there to apply like every 7 days because it is thicker. If you apply it too much, what starts to happen is that then it could affect the way your plant's growing because too much oil on the actual leaves and stuff like that starts to affect the way plants grow. So a lot of times, if you look at a lot of neem products, it tells you to wait before you reapply it. So what happens is that, so say you sprayed your plant and you didn't get all the mites, say a few mites lived or they were under leaves or whatever and you didn't get them, there's 7 days now that you're going to have to wait to reapply that neem. That in those 7 days, those mites will multiply very, very quickly. And so with ours, you could apply ours almost every day until you eradicate the problem. So that's pretty nice. So say you sprayed and guess what? Some of them got away because that usually happens. Sometimes you're not getting everything. And so you're able to apply this. You're able to apply this to the day of harvest as well. So that's another thing. So if you're growing edibles, you could literally use this to the day of harvest, pick that fruit or vegetable and eat it. I mean, I've done demos where I've actually sprayed this on fruit and eat it. It doesn't taste that great. They're made of essential oils. Everything that you read on the back is stuff that's edible. I mean, we're not recommending you use it as a salad dressing or anything, but that's how safe it is. Is that you're not going to die even if you spray it on your plants and you forget to wash off whatever you grew and you ate it. It's not gonna affect you in any way. But it's nice that the fact that you could use it every day and eradicate the problem. I always recommend if you're doing gardening, if you're doing edibles, grab yourself one of these. People ask, well, I don't have any problems. Look, I've been gardening for a long time, an avid gardener, and guess what? You're going to have problems. Here's the deal. You're better to be proactive than reactive, because people always think, well, you're just trying to sell me more stuff. That's not the case at all. I'm not trying to sell you any more stuff, but the reality is that if you have a garden, and here's the shame, because if you're growing whatever, X vegetables, and you spend all this time and now you have bugs multiply very quickly. On the average, the consumer spends about 3 days before they actually go buy something to address that problem. What happens in those 3 days with bugs could ruin your plant that you spent almost all spring long to get to a one point, and then guess what? These bugs destroy it. So have yourself this already handy in case something happens, because I guarantee you, just in case, usually always happens. Something, one plant or another starts getting something. The way bugs work typically, they're kind of like vultures. They go for the weakest plant. So it's always really important to have, a healthy soil, healthy plants. When you have a healthy plant, is less prone for bugs and disease to start happening. And a lot of times I've seen this scenario in my own garden. I've talked to many people is that I have all these rose bushes, but one rose bush is just, oh my God, it's covered. Well, more than likely that rose bush is the weakest link. Bugs, especially bugs with antennas, they could sense these things. They also send and communicate back to each other via their little antennas. With a lot of, bugs that have antennas, they send stuff back and forth telling you, hey, I found a plant. And so they're like vultures. They go to the weakest one and they attack the weakest one. I've literally had a plant where right next to it, one tomato plant's fine, the next tomato plant has mites. The other plant, nothing on it. They went after the weakest link. So that's why I'm saying, it's important to have, it's better to be proactive than reactive. So, having yourself a pesticide to use, even if you don't have any starting the season, it's always great to do. And like I said, this one's pretty forgiving. You could spray this. You could spray this without washing your hands. You could spray this every day until you eradicate the problem, and you could use this all the way up to the day of harvest. So this is our yard and garden. We have this in a ready to spray, also a hose in a concentrate. So it's available in different forms, the way you could get it. And that's it. It's 100% organic. It's all made of essential oils. I don't know if you guys could see this, but everything that you see on here, you're going to be able to pronounce pretty much. There's nothing in there that's foreign and you can't pronounce. I mean, everybody's pretty much familiar with rosemary, thyme, peppermint oil, cinnamon oil. So, we make a few different products. We have a rosin flower. We have a home pest control too. This is for inside the house. These two, just so you know, if you have veggies and you have this guy, you could use it on it. A lot of times we do a little bit of marketing. The percentages are a little different on the essential oils we use. But like, for example, if you have this guy, this is our home pest. This is more for around the house or indoors. I would not really recommend this for your veggies. Anawalt does carry this. This one has a little bit of higher percentage on the oils. And so it's going to be a little harder. So on some plants, it wouldn't do that great. This one's really more intended, to spray around the perimeter of your house, kind of like a raid, but an organic version of it, an organic version of a home pest, like an ortho home pest, but organic in the black bottle. These are more intended for your garden. The percentages of the essential oils are a little different, and that is hard. But we also make our soils, and our soils is the same thing. There's no different on it. We have our potting soil, and then we also do planting mixes. And for some of you who are asking, well, what's the difference, between a potting soil and a planting mix? Because when you go to the store and you see a lot of soils available, it can get very confusing and very deceiving. And why should I use this versus another? So our potting soil is meant for containers. So can you use this in a raised bed? Yes, you could use this in a raised bed. But in a raised bed, think of a raised bed as a big giant container, right? Because that's basically what it is. And that's why raised beds have become very popular, is because a lot of soils around, it takes a while for your native soil to, become conditioned and become more workable and pliable. So why raised beds have gotten very popular is because you could control and you could actually fill it with a better soil. So so you could use a potting soil in a raised bed. Here's the thing: a potting soil usually costs more than potting mixes, and the reason for that is because, well, with ours there is perlite in there, and the perlite's going to help with drainage. So there's a cost involved to that. There's more ingredients typically with ours and a lot of other companies. Usually companies, there's more ingredients, amendments in a potting soil than there is in planting mixes. And so when you start looking at planting mixes versus potting soils, you're going to see a price difference. When the owner of Dr. Earth got into making soils, his whole idea, we started, we have our potting soil, but then we have a planting mix. And so, we have a fruit tree planting mix. We have our homegrown planting mix. This is for vegetables in ground. And so this is meant for containers. Potting soils are meant for containers. Planting mixes are usually meant for native soils, for mixing it into your native soil, mixing it in along with the native soil. And so here's where the owner of Dr. Earth kind of started separating himself from a lot of companies. A lot of companies that offer soils, when it comes to planting mixes, they started thinking more on the lines of commodity and being at certain price points. And so when you start taking a look at planting mixes versus potting soils, you're going to notice a difference in price. And the reason for that is because typically in our industry, planting mixes have become like a commodity. And a lot of companies will say, well, like, I want to be at this price point. And when you want to be at this price point, that means you're adding less stuff into your mix to get you at that price point. People say, well, why is your soils a little bit more expensive and why is your planting mixes more expensive? Well, the owner took this approach to it. He said, you know what, there's a lot of planting mixes that are out there that are kind of on the commodity end. We want to be more in a premium end, especially when it comes to planting mixes for in-ground, because if you're buying a fruit tree or any kind of tree or any shrub, and you're putting it into the ground around your property, that's a pretty big investment for a couple different reasons. You're investing, obviously, the price of a tree or a bush is more than, say, an annual, that you're buying in a 6-pack. But for some reason, we've made potting soils more expensive and more premium, but then planting mixes on stuff that you're going to add that's going to live longer, you're going to invest more time and money watering it, companies tend to go cheaper on that. And so the owner wanted to make a planting mix that was as premium as the potting soil that we're making. So our planting mixes have our true biotics in it. It's got the mycorrhiza, it's got the microbes in it. And not only that, but our planting mixes also have, like, good example, this planting mix right here is infused with our homegrown fertilizer. So you're also getting fertilizer amendment in our planting mixes. So people ask me this all the time. People just think like, oh, you guys are overcharging. When you start taking a look at the ingredients on products, especially when it comes to organics, it's good to see what they're being made out of and the value that you're getting for it, because it's very true. I mean, if I was going to plant a lemon tree in the ground, I'm going to use a planting mix that has microbes in it to help the roots, that has the microbes, that has the fertilizer. That's a better, because I want that lemon tree from the very start to grow good instead of using a cheap planting mix. And that's what happens is that, a lot of companies just make a planting mix to have, and they worry more about price point. But, why not invest a good product when you're investing something into a bush or a tree that's going to be around for a long time, and you're going to make an investment anyways with that. So, our planting mixes, our potting soils are all organic. All of them are OMRI, 100% organic. They're non-GMO. A lot of the green, like, we use green waste. You'll see that in the back of the ingredients on our soils, and people have asked me this question. Green waste, is that the stuff that is being collected off the sidewalk from cities? No, that's not the green waste we use. The green waste that we use in our planting mixes is that we actually teamed up with a lot of organic farmers. And so when the farmers pack up their produce and the stuff that they don't use after they harvest, we use that as part of the green waste. So the green waste that you see in our planting mixes, that's where a lot of the green waste is coming from. I warn you when you're using green waste, find out where it's coming from, because there's good intentions with green waste, but when cities started doing the whole green waste collection, they didn't realize that a lot of people use weed killers and a lot of pesticides in it, and so using that green waste again, is not a good idea. So unless you know where it comes from. And you could verify where that green waste comes from. So that's some of the little things that we do with our soils and our planting mixes. But that's kind of where Dr. Earth comes from. And we tend to try to be innovative and also be very productive on the stuff that we use. Because that's at the end of the day, that's what you guys want. You guys want to be productive. You want stuff that you could use. They're going to see the results. And that's where we stand, and trying to do it ethically and try to bring you the most premium without being too expensive. I mean, as it is now, we get that a lot. When you go walk into the store and you see us versus a lot of our competitors, you're going to notice the price difference. Our 4-pound fertilizer, versus the competitor's 4-pound of fertilizer. You're going to notice there's a price difference. But I encourage you to turn the packages around look at what they're made out of. Like I said, we are an ocean-based fertilizer company, so a lot of on our dry fertilizer, that's what you're going to notice. A lot of our competitors, it's going to be chicken manure based. And look at chicken manure is great, but in all reality, you know, even if it's organic chicken manure, what a lot of people don't realize, and there's a whole article that the owner wrote in the magazine that you guys are welcome to go and check out on our website, of the reasons why we don't use chicken. And don't get me wrong, if you have a backyard chicken and that chicken is running around your backyard and giving you fertilizer, that's great, because guess what? More than likely that chicken is eating more of a natural diet than a lot of the chicken poop that's being used in products. Even if it's organic, keep in mind there's a lot of organic farms that are feeding chickens organic food, but that organic food is not a natural diet of what that chicken should be eating. And so a lot of times they're being fed organic fillers, so they could literally claim it as being organic chicken, right? So if you're eating, you know, so that's the big difference versus a chicken that's eating worms, bugs, natural stuff. That poop from a backyard chicken is probably better than a lot of the poop that's used in our industry. So, you know, it's a good idea to look at what they're made out of. And also when it comes to organic gardening, it's all about the breakdown. So the true biotics, the microbes, look at that. We're also very, very, very generous on the amounts that we put. By law, if a company is putting anything when it comes to mycorrhizae and microbes, they have to list it on the back of the package, and they have to show you the quantities. So you don't have to take my word for it. You could actually just turn our competitor and look at ours versus our competitor, and you're going to see that we're very generous on the amount that we put in there. And I can't stress that enough. Without microbes, organic gardening kind of comes to a halt. Microbes are the key to the breakdown of organic matter and helps break down the organic matter and helps your plant uptake the nutrients. So, you know, look for that when you're looking around and you're shopping. But I'm going to open this up to any questions, and let me look if there's any questions here. Okay, here's how do I know when I need to add an organic fertilizer to my soil? Is there a way to test the soil? That's a good question. Yes, you could actually do a test on your soil, and they sell test kits. They sell some very inexpensive to, you know, sophisticated ones. The very inexpensive ones work just as great. They'll give you a ballpark. You know, you don't have to be so accurate. But how do you know? Well, it's if you haven't fertilized for a while. You know, typically with our dry fertilizer, for a good example, in the growing season, you're going to want to apply at least once every 2 months. And the directions are on here. You can't just look at a soil and go, hey, I need to fertilize. You know, you're going to have to, you know, recall of the last time you used it, or you could do a test. But the problem sometimes with tests, unless it's completely out of whack, a lot of times people will do a soil test and, you know, they might be low on something. And so they might be low on potassium or something like that, or low on phosphorus. And then they automatically think that they have to go buy something with high phosphorus. You don't have to do that. You could just apply a fertilizer. Like you could put our all-purpose down, or say if you're doing veggies, you could apply our homegrown, and that would actually help correct a lot of the deficiencies. Once the microbes start working, a lot of times it will balance the pH and it will balance those deficiencies. It's usually when something's really, really out of whack and it's like very, very, very low and depleted on something that you might have to add something to compensate for that. So that's a good question. I mean, that's one way of knowing. Here's another question here. Let's see. Let's see here. Oh, they're saying, hey, thank you. Started a garden bed. That's good. So when is it good to have a higher potassium in your fertilizer? You know, a high and it just depends on what is high for you. Now keep in mind, this is something I probably didn't go over. When you're looking at MPKs, okay, when you're looking at these numbers on organics, typically those MPKs are lower. When you're looking at synthetic MPKs that are not organic, they're very high. So it just really depends on the definition on what you're meaning by a high. On the last number, a lot of times that's not what's really dictating what's happening and growing with your plant. So I wouldn't really worry about that, and it just depends on what you're referring to as a higher potassium. And then also too depends on what you're growing. Certain plants, there are exceptions to the rules on everything, whether they're trees or plants or sometimes certain plants might require something, but that's kind of out of the norm for the most part. Your potassium doesn't have to be very high. A lot of times when somebody's trying to achieve something like that is that they're being specific on something. So in general, it doesn't have to have that high of a number, if that makes sense. But I do encourage you guys to go to our website, check out our magazine. There's several on there. This is the 2017 edition. This is the latest one, and it does break down MPKs, and there's a lot of good general information. But I think I've taken up enough of you guys' time. I appreciate the time. I think I might have gone a little long, and if you guys ever want to follow us, we're on Instagram and Dr. Earth. I also have my own Instagram page as well, if you guys want to follow me there as well, and I'll put that on there as well. I just post a lot of pictures of nurseries and gardens and stuff like that, but you could follow me on, I don't know if you could see that, but Grow No. I just post a lot of pictures on that. You're more than welcome to message me on there on any questions on that. But that's Grow No, and I appreciate it. Guys, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of the day. And I hope you guys learned a little something.
Thank you.
Very informative. Thank you.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
Can you do one in the future on seeds and planting seeds, and so you don't have to always go to the nursery and buy the plants, which can be expensive?
Yeah, no, definitely be on the lookout. I will be working with Anawalt to do some more classes, and that's a good idea. I just try to kind of get I'm kind of a little over the place a little bit, but I just kind of want to get a general understanding. Like I said, I do recommend you guys going on our website. Our website has a lot of good information. There's our learning center portion of it, but then there's the magazine portion. The magazine portion of it, the owner's written a couple of books and magazines, and they're all, the good thing about our magazines is that they're just general information that will apply whether you're using our brand or any other brand that's organic. And it really kind of breaks it down without getting so, without feeling like you're going to a university. So it makes it pretty easy to learn some of the stuff and the basics on there. So, and we also have our YouTube channel as well, that the owner has done himself, a lot of videos that he's done throughout the years. So I encourage you guys to go on there. There's a lot of good information. But
hey,
sure.
I just quickly added another question. Do you think you could take a look at it and see if it works?
Sure. You want to just ask me the question?
Well, I planted veggies last fall or summer, I guess, and in a raised bed, and met with minimal success. So I pulled them all out a couple months ago, and it's been just lying fallow. And I'm going to start again, pretty soon, spring coming, to replant. And my question is, do I have to replace the whole soil, or can I add fresh soil, or what would you?
The only time I recommend.
What do you think?
The only time I get this question asked a lot. The only time I recommend replacing the soil is if you have a soil-borne disease. Then I would recommend getting rid of that. If there's been no signs of any kind of soil-borne disease, no. What you want to keep doing is that you definitely want to amend, because here's what here's what's happening is that when your raised bed's sitting there and maybe there's nothing in it, I do also recommend leaving stuff growing there, even if it's weeds. Let the weeds grow when you're not using it, because what's happening there is that it's keeping that biology alive in the soil. It's keeping the microbes there, the roots are there. So it might not look that great, but guess what? You're going to have a head start when you pull that out, and then you're ready to plant in there. What I would suggest is that add a little bit more compost, maybe add some planting mix in there to kind of rejuvenate it, and then definitely fertilize it. But or if you don't want to leave anything growing in it, cover it with, hay, straw, some kind of mulch, because if you let it just dry out, then it's basically, when you let it dry out so much, all the microbes in there, all the mycorrhiza, it just dies, and you have to start it fresh again. So if you leave weeds and you leave stuff growing, like what I typically do is that once winter comes, I kind of slow down with gardening. It's not as, I'm more of a spring gardener, and, but what happens is that I'll let stuff just kind of die on its own and leave stuff there, and it might start looking a little ugly. I might trim it up, but I don't pull it out yet, just because there's a lot still going on in that soil. And I'll leave it like that until I'm ready. Then I know I'm going to start planting there. Then that's when I might remove that and start, amending it a little bit more. But then I'm not starting from scratch. There's already, a colonization going on in there. So I definitely would just encourage leaving that, and you shouldn't have to.
Well, it's too late to leave it, but if I go ahead and plant and amend it a bit and start putting the fertilizers and stuff in it, it should start rebuilding.
Yep. And that's what it is. I mean, that's what we're constantly doing. We're feeding that soil, because, when you're growing it, and especially when you're dealing with fruits and vegetables, they start to deplete, and you need to replenish. In nature, going back to that story about my neighbor that had, the orange tree loaded, is that plants will naturally do that. They drop their leaves, they drop the fruit. If nobody's there to pick it up, it decomposes and it's replenishing themselves. So when that's not happening naturally, you got to do that. We're helping you. We're putting this all together so you can keep doing that. So
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I have a question, because I do a lot similar to yours of container gardening. I've got gophers. I can't plant anything in the dirt because the gophers come. So I have tons and tons of large and small containers. I went to Anawalt and talked to them about what to do for the next season. I got two different answers. But one of the answers was what you, I think, have said. They said, take out half of the dirt and then put in the, not the planting, but the potting soil.
Yeah.
So I should take out half of the potting soil that's already in the container and put fresh, he said, because it's probably all used up, the nutrients.
Well, here's the thing. I do all my tomatoes, and I do grow heirloom tomatoes and on a regular basis, and I do them all in containers. And so here's what I recommend. And before
how big is your container for tomatoes?
For tomatoes, I use at least 15-gallon containers or larger.
Okay.
Yeah. I like to, the bigger the container, the bigger your plant's going to get, typically, especially with tomatoes. If you keep it in a smaller container, you're only going to get such a big plant. But typically what happens is that, here's what I do. At the end of the season, when I pull out the tomato plant, it's almost all root. So I'll shake all that stuff out, and then I put it through a sifter. This is what I do, but most of it, a lot of it, it's the root of the tomato plant. So then I take that and I'll either reuse it or I'll put it in my raised bed. But you don't have to necessarily replace the whole soil. So like, say you grew something in your container and you pulled it out after you harvested, and say they're radishes. I'm just going to use that as an example. Say you had a container and you grew radishes in there. Once you harvested the radishes, the only time I recommend you adding more soil is that over time with container gardening, you kind of flush things out. Here's another word of advice too when it comes to container gardening, is that when you water your containers, don't water where so much water is coming out, because what you're doing is you're flushing out a lot of the nutrient. So keep that. So when you water your containers, what I like to do is that every once in a while, especially with tomatoes could be a little bit different because they love the water. I mean, you have to keep them, and after a certain point in containers, the root starts to get so big that you have to water them a little more often. But I water where barely I start seeing water kind of come out. Once it barely starts coming out, I stop. If you let too much water ooze out of there, you start washing a lot of that nutrients out. You don't want to do that with containers. You gotta, and that's why a lot of times with containers, and if you look at our directions too, you're applying it more often because you end up washing a lot of that out. So a tip is to make sure that when you're watering them, to not let it just, a lot of people have the tendency to do that. When I first started, gardening, when I first got into this industry, I'd water plants until all this water would come out of the containers and I knew they were well watered. Well, guess what? You're leaching out a lot of the good stuff. So,
Okay. I don't have access to straw. What else can I mulch with? Do you sell a product, or
well,
do I take my garbage, my tomato peels and carrot peels, or what do I do?
I would recommend using that if they've been decomposed, but I wouldn't suggest you just throwing them in there, just, fresh banana peels or your orange peels freshly on there. Compost them if you can.
They don't do that.
If you don't have the time, we do make a compost. And so even adding compost on it, we make a compost that you could put on the top. That's going to help retain some of that moisture in there. So
I have to buy, your only suggestion is purchasing compost.
Yeah, because I purchase straw too. So, you're going to purchase something, one thing or another, unless you have something there.
Where do you get the straw? Follow a horse or something?
No, I actually, there's a feed store that I go to that I actually buy a bale that's very inexpensive. And also too, if you're going to use straw, make sure that it hasn't been sprayed with pesticide. So sometimes some of the straw that they do sell, so you
pesticide free.
Yeah. But what you're starting to see now, though, this year has been tremendous for our industry. A lot of people have been gardening just because they've been at home more. And so what you're going to see, what you're starting to see more in our industry, you're going to start seeing that bales of hay is going to become a little bit more of a popular thing. You're going to start seeing that in stores more than you typically will, because a lot of gardeners have been using that. It's a good way. It's a cheap way. It breaks down very inexpensively. And so, you could go to a pet store and they could sell you the straw there. And sometimes from the pet store, it might be a little bit more, but then you know that it's pest free because you're using it around your pets. So you could do that. You could use leaves. If you have already dried leaves, you could mulch smash them up and just use that on the top to kind of help.
But flat leaves, big leaves don't work. You have to grind them up somehow.
I would grind them a little bit. I wouldn't use like big maple leaves or anything like that. If you would, I just kind of smash them up. But that would help. Anything to kind of help it to prevent it from drying up. So,
the big leaves prevent the water from going into the soil, right?
Yeah. And that's why you kind of don't want something that big, because when you water, but eventually it will, but yeah.
You could do it like wine, just put them in a tub and jump on them.
There you go. Yeah. Or put them in a bag, smash them up, and then come back out and just around. But there's ways, inexpensive ways and things like that you could do.
That's good.
That will help.
I can go out now because I've got all kinds of sycamore leaves.
There you go. Yeah, it's the time, but
it's too late for the Chinese elms, but because they're tiny. But the sycamore leaves are big. I can smash those suckers up.
Yeah.
When I'm planting seeds, especially milkweed, because milkweed is so important for the monarch butterflies, and they're so expensive when I go and I buy them, like $10 for one plant.
Yeah.
So I've saved my milkweed seeds, and I've got all my baby milkweed seeds that are growing. Some are very, very small, and I've transplanted them as they get bigger. So I have some in, bigger containers and some that are in the little teeny ones. How often is it dangerous to keep transplanting them? Should I put the little babies into a great big container right off, or do I go little by little?
Well, typically there's, if you're doing this for production, a lot of times, you start off from a small cell to a bigger cell but in reality, naturally transplant is kind of it's not a natural thing. In nature, plants don't get transplanted. Usually when a plant sits there and grows, it stays in that spot. So even if you were to put some seedlings, which I've done, in a big pot, a lot of people will say, well, I'm going to grow up from one pot to the other, and that's not bad either. But there's also chances of you stressing out the plant. You could go ahead and put that seedling into the big container that it's going to be in automatically. And there's no rule telling you that there's not. Typically, when people, and it's usually in the ag industry, that they go from one to it because they have a process that they're doing. But if you were to take that seedling and put it in a big pot, you're not doing anything wrong. It's actually more natural for that plant, because a plant usually stays in one spot when it sprouts in nature. So
Thank you. Very important answer for me. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, not a problem. But thank you
Thank
guys very much.
Okay.
And you guys enjoy the rest of the day.
We look forward to your next class.
Thank you guys.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Enjoy.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.